right now. There is a carefully constructed narrative being sold to the public about global trade. Protectionism and the supposed dominance of the American industrial machine. We are constantly told that when massive tariffs are slapped on the border, it is the foreign nations, countries like ours, that inevitably pay the heavy price for trying to compete. But what if I told you that one of the most aggressive economic weapons recently deployed against Canada has just spectacularly backfired? What if the very policy designed to punish our industries and force us into economic submission has actually handed us the keys to a completely new global empire? Behind closed doors, corporate executives and political strategists are quietly panicking because a massive 50% tariff on aluminum, intended to crush outside competition, has done the exact opposite. It hasn't strengthened domestic American industry. It hasn't brought manufacturing roaring back to the Rust Belt. Instead, it has triggered a seismic shift in global power. And the consequences are rippling through every factory, supply chain, and dealership across the globe. The truth is, while Washington thought they were trapping us in an unwinnable trade war, they accidentally gave Canada the greatest geopolitical gift of the decade. But that's not the most surprising part. To truly understand the sheer scale of this miscalculation, we need to look at what is happening on the ground right now. Cutting through the political rhetoric, tariffs are always promoted as a magic bullet to make foreign producers foot the bill. It is an incredibly easy, populist political sell. But economics doesn't care about political slogans. The harsh reality is that the cost doesn't just vanish into thin air, it simply changes hands. And those hands almost always belong to everyday consumers and domestic manufacturers. By early June of 2026, the all-in cost for aluminum in the United States had skyrocketed to a staggering $6,200 per ton. Think about what that number actually represents. It isn't just a digitized figure flashing on a spreadsheet for Wall Street traders to gamble on. That is a devastating, inescapable tax on the entire manufacturing sector, creating an unbearable pressure cooker for industries ranging from commercial aerospace to residential construction. And for the automotive industry, the timing of this price explosion could not possibly be worse. Automakers are already bleeding capital at an unprecedented rate. They are drowning in the colossal, multi-billion-dollar costs of electric vehicle development. They are battling incredibly complex software engineering hurdles. And they are facing an increasingly exhausted consumer base that simply cannot afford yet another price hike. Aluminum is the literal, physical backbone of modern transportation. You cannot build a modern, heavy-duty pickup truck, a highly fuel-efficient family SUV, the intricate suspension systems keeping you safe on the highway, or the highly specialized, impact-resistant enclosures protecting incredibly volatile EV batteries without it. When the base price of that vital, foundational metal explodes, manufacturers are backed into a terrifying corner with zero attractive options. They can try to absorb the massive financial losses, which instantly angers shareholders and inevitably leads to sweeping job cuts on the factory floor. They can try to squeeze their smaller, localized parts suppliers, driving independent businesses into sudden bankruptcy. They can waste millions attempting to completely redesign vital vehicle components with cheaper, inferior materials, or what almost always happens in the end, they can simply pass the entire exorbitant cost directly onto you. You are the one who walks onto a dealership lot, looks at a piece of paper on a window, and wonders why the sticker price of a standard commuter vehicle now requires a multi-decade mortgage. The everyday citizen ends up paying the brunt of the tariff without ever realizing that the cost of aluminum played the starring role in their deepening financial strain. What happened next was even more revealing. Because soaring domestic costs in one country alone do not explain why Canadian aluminum has suddenly become the most fiercely contested and highly prized commodity on the planet. To grasp the true magnitude of this shift, we have to pull back our lens and look at the intense global supply pressures that are violently reshaping the international market. While North America was locked in a bitter, headline-grabbing tariff dispute, a perfect economic storm was brewing across the Atlantic Ocean. Europe suddenly found itself in a desperate, panicked scramble for basic industrial survival. Their aluminum crisis didn't just happen overnight. It was a cascading series of geopolitical disasters arriving all at once. For years, the European region had been actively trying to decouple from Russian metal, frantically working to sever ties with one of their largest historical suppliers. At the exact same time, they were being relentlessly battered by crippling, historically high energy costs that forced major domestic smelters to power down or lock their doors completely. It is a simple law of manufacturing that you cannot run an energy-intensive aluminum smelter when the electricity costs more than the finished product you are trying to sell. And just as they were desperately trying to stabilize their footing, renewed instability and conflict in the Middle East injected a massive, lethal dose of uncertainty into whatever fragile maritime supply chains remained intact. Europe represents a massive, undeniable chunk of worldwide demand. And in this hyper-connected global economy, even a slight hiccup in supply can trigger immediate international shockwaves. Europe was suddenly starving for reliable metal right at the exact moment global availability was aggressively tightening. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. As panic fully set in and industrial demand spiked, premium prices surged dramatically across the globe. America, through its own self-imposed, heavy-handed tariffs, ironically isolated itself, becoming one of the most hostile and expensive aluminum markets on Earth. But Europe, searching frantically for a dependable, high-quality lifeline, looked across the ocean and found an incredibly willing partner. They found Canada. Canada's sudden, overwhelming dominance in this space extends far, far beyond simple production volume. We aren't just selling them raw metal, we are selling them exactly the kind of highly specialized metal the future demands. Let's talk about the incredible strategic advantage of Quebec. Much of our country's world-class aluminum is forged utilizing the province's massive, highly developed hydroelectric power network. This isn't just a neat environmental talking point for politicians to use at climate summits. It is a brutal, undeniable competitive advantage. Because we harness the power of rushing water rather than burning fossil fuels, Canadian aluminum naturally possesses a significantly lower carbon footprint than nearly any competing source on the global market. In a world where European automakers, aerospace giants, and global manufacturers are facing incredibly strict environmental regulations and facing crippling, punitive carbon taxes, our green aluminum is no longer just a basic commodity. It is a premium, highly sought-after strategic asset. We are providing them with the clean, secure, and geopolitically reliable supply chains they absolutely desperately need to survive the next decade of green industrial evolution. The numbers become even more concerning when you look closer at the actual trade patterns taking shape today. The fundamental shift is already happening, right under the noses of the very policymakers who drafted the tariff legislation in the first place. Canada's share of American aluminum imports has noticeably, measurably declined compared to previous historical years. We haven't completely abandoned the United States market, but we are unequivocally no longer purely reliant on them to keep our mills running. Meanwhile, our shipments across the Atlantic to Europe have absolutely exploded in volume. Why? Because of a vital, often overlooked economic concept known as netback. Netback is the actual, tangible profit that a producer gets to keep in their bank account after all the transportation costs, the endless border fees, and yes, the massive punitive tariffs are officially deducted. Washington politicians can tout incredibly high domestic prices all they want on television. But if a 50% tariff completely obliterates the profit margin the second the metal crosses the border, Canadian producers simply aren't going to play the game. The tariff didn't just artificially inflate American prices, it aggressively incentivized Canadian businesses to pack up their premium supply and ship it across the ocean. We were supposed to be trapped. The entire American economic narrative relied on a massive, highly arrogant assumption that Canada simply had nowhere else to go. For decades, it was just blindly accepted as a fundamental law of North American nature that Canadian resources would inevitably, unquestionably flow south to feed American factories. When the tariffs hit that devastating 50% mark, the absolute expectation in Washington was that we would just grit our teeth, take the severe financial beating, and keep the supply trucks rolling south because we lacked the leverage to do anything else. But markets are inherently ruthless, and they rarely obey the arrogant expectations of politicians sitting in comfortable offices. As selling into the United States became less and less profitable, Canadian executives did exactly what any rational, forward-thinking business leader would do to protect their operations. They picked up the phone. They started calling Europe, facing a terrifying existential supply crisis. Essentially, rolled out the red carpet. The tariff didn't trap us, it liberated us. It forcefully redirected the entire flow of global trade. For the automotive industry globally, this development is genuinely terrifying. Remember, we are rapidly moving into an era where electric vehicles completely dictate the direction of the market. Aluminum is the irreplaceable, beating heart of EV architecture. Without it, you do not have protective battery enclosures. You do not have the lightweight body panels required to offset the massive road-crushing weight of lithium-ion batteries. And you do not have the highly tuned suspension components required to keep these incredibly heavy vehicles safely on the road. This is no longer just a petty, temporary cross-border trade dispute over a generic metal commodity. It has rapidly evolved into a high-stakes, cutthroat battle over access to a vital, world-building industrial resource. This matters deeply to the everyday citizen because it represents a fundamental, generational shift in our country's economic leverage. For generations, our entire national economy has been dangerously reliant on the unpredictable whims of our southern neighbor. When their economy sneezed, we caught a severe cold. When they imposed sudden protectionist policies to score cheap domestic political points, our hard-working men and women in the Saguenay, in Kitimat, and across our vital manufacturing corridors felt the immediate, terrifying threat of sudden layoffs, crushing wage stagnation, and deep economic anxiety. But this massive strategic pivot to Europe represents a profound, necessary diversification of our national portfolio. It means firmly securing well-paying, long-term industrial jobs right here at home that are heavily shielded from the wildly unpredictable volatility of American election cycles. It means billions of dollars in new export revenue continuously flowing back into our local communities, directly supporting our crumbling municipal infrastructure, heavily funding our essential social systems, and potentially helping to ease the suffocating, relentless cost of living crisis that so many hardworking families are currently enduring. When our critical resource-heavy industries find highly lucrative, incredibly eager markets far outside of North America, it drastically strengthens the overall value of our national exports and brings vital, much-needed capital into a country that desperately requires sustained economic growth to support its housing markets and public services. But the biggest, most impactful consequences may still lie ahead of us, because the most critical development in this entire saga isn't just that massive cargo ships full of Canadian aluminum are currently crossing the Atlantic Ocean. It is the undeniable, terrifying fact for American manufacturers that long-term, Structural global supply chains are being permanently rewritten. Supply chains have incredibly long memories. It takes a massive, exhausting amount of time, vast amounts of capital, and endless bureaucratic wrangling for a major global manufacturer to officially qualify a brand new supplier. They have to sign exhaustive, ironclad multi-year contracts. They have to establish entirely new, highly complex marine and rail logistics networks from scratch. They have to meticulously, carefully integrate foreign materials into their incredibly rigid, precision-based production lines. Once that colossal, multi-million-dollar investment of time and money is finally made, those relationships do not easily break. Companies invest heavily in trusted, proven, reliable partnerships, and they rarely, if ever, abandon them just because a political administration in another country suddenly decides to change its mind a few years down the line. Canada has completely proven itself on the world stage. We now confidently hold a hand of cards that global buyers desperately want to play with. We offer unmatched reliability. We offer ethically sourced production. We offer environmentally friendly manufacturing powered by immense, clean hydroelectric energy. And we possess unhindered access to the vast, incredibly lucrative Atlantic market. The long-term implications for our future are absolutely staggering. The United States will, of course, always remain a massive and highly important customer for Canadian goods. Our shared geography alone virtually guarantees that reality. But the underlying dynamic has fundamentally, permanently shifted. Canada now has options. We have highly profitable alternatives. And in the ruthless world of global economics, alternatives equal undeniable leverage. The next time major trade negotiations begin, the balance of power sitting at that table will not be nearly as lopsided as it once historically was. We are witnessing the real-time emergence of a completely new global aluminum order, one where deep supply chain resilience and strict environmental competitiveness completely trump short-sighted, protectionist border taxes. While the 50% tariff was loudly and proudly championed as a protective shield for American industry, it has instead acted as a crushing anvil, punishing domestic manufacturers with astronomical operating costs while inadvertently handing Canadian producers the ultimate golden incentive to conquer new, highly profitable markets abroad. Europe's desperate, panicked search for clean, reliable resources met our massive production capacity perfectly, organically forging powerful alliances that barely even existed half a decade ago. If these wildly elevated material costs in the United States persist, while Europe simultaneously continues to deeply entrench its supply lines with Canadian producers, the very future of vehicle pricing, manufacturing dominance, and global industrial power will be irrevocably altered. The policy that was supposed to build an impenetrable wall around American industry merely built a highly efficient bridge for Canadian resources to reach the rest of the world. It is a stark, undeniable reminder that in the highly complex, deeply interconnected web of international trade, aggressive, poorly thought out protectionism often severely punishes the very people it loudly claims to protect. We are no longer just the quiet, reliable, perpetually available backyard resource pool for a single economic superpower. Canada has firmly stepped onto the global stage as a primary, indispensable architect of the new green industrial revolution. And as the global race for securing critical materials continues to rapidly accelerate, our unique ability to confidently control, cleanly produce, and strategically export these absolutely vital resources will heavily dictate the prosperity of our entire nation, the long-term security of our jobs, and the day-to-day economic reality for generations of Canadians to come. The world desperately needs what we have. And for the first time in a very long time, We are the ones finally setting the price.